You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And again, thanks for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. Tune in and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast. Got a question for an upcoming mailbag episode? Make sure you drop mailbag in the comment. Send us a DM over on Twitter, Facebook, what have you, or hit us up in the YouTube comments. Again, tag it mailbag so it's easy to find. Look forward to discussing those questions down the road. So Oklahoma left off of ESPN's way too early All-American list. You lose Danny Stutzman, Billy Bowman out the door to the NFL. That was kind of your star power on the defensive side of the ball, and your offense was so bad in 2024, nobody's going to put them as an All-American or give you any All-American love going into 2025. Again, a unit with a ton to prove. But defensively, there are some guys that I think could vie for All-American honors in 2025, but I'm going to start with the guy that a lot of this hinges on, and that's John Mateer. If John Mateer comes in and is successful for Oklahoma, I'm not saying he could be an All-American or that he will be an All-American, but I think he could be an All-American. I know I just said I'm not saying that he could be. I absolutely think he could be an All-American. And so much of that's going to ride on how well the offensive line plays, what the health of the wide receiver room looks like, the development of that group. But John Mateer showed at Washington State that he's got the ability to sling the ball. He's got the ability to run the rock. And for Oklahoma to get to contender status, they need their offense to be really, really good. They just do. It takes a totality of a team playing good football to become a playoff contender. And Oklahoma didn't have that at all in 2024. But if John Mateer is able to come in and be a fringe Heisman contender and Oklahoma gets to 10, 11 wins, I 100% believe he could be viewed as an All-American quarterback next year. Now, ESPN believes that's going to be Cade Klubnik of Clemson, who had a really strong end to the season. He was really, really good after some early season, miscues for the Tigers, but I think quarterback is kind of wide open next year. There's no definitive answer to who the best quarterback is in the country. There are expectations and assumptions being made down in Texas, but I think it's as wide open as it's been in a while. There's no Shadur Sanders. There's no Quinn Ewers. There's no Dylan Gabriel. There's no Will Howard. There's no Jalen Milroe. Carson Beck's still at Miami, but there's no Cam Ward. Who am I missing? Who am I leaving off? I'm sure I'm leaving somebody off that was a really, really good quarterback last year. No Jalen Milroe, no Jackson Dart. Garrett Nussmeier, I think, is a good maybe option to be a quarterback All-American. I'm really high on what he's going to be capable of, especially after the way he torched Oklahoma after getting obliterated by R. Mason Thomas. And that brings me to the next guy that I think could be an All-American in 2025, and that's R. Mason Thomas. 9 sacks last year, had a big breakout season, all while kind of being Oklahoma's predominant pass rusher. They didn't really have a second guy playing Robin to him. I mean, Ethan Downs had an okay season with 3 sacks, but you didn't really get much of anything else. Grayson Halton, 5 sacks. He had a breakout season in his own right. But on the other side of the defensive line, you didn't really get consistent pass rush. And hopefully, with a guy like Marvin Jones Jr. coming to town, you're getting a bookend pass rush now that's going to free R. Mason Thomas up to be in some one-on-one situations more, as opposed to having to face double and triple teams. Shout out to the end of the Missouri game where it's 3rd and 16 and R. Mason Thomas, they're rushing 3. Zach Alley calling a 3-man rush, and R. Mason Thomas is getting triple teamed. Of course, he has no chance to get to the quarterback when you're getting triple teamed. No defensive lineman, except for maybe Aaron Donald, is going to get to a quarterback when he's being triple teamed. I think R. Mason Thomas has a great shot to be an All-American this year. If he can go out and he can produce another 9, maybe a 10 sack season for the Oklahoma Sooners, I don't see any reason why he's not going to be in consideration for some All-American honors. They picked Dylan Stewart at South Carolina, who, man, he was a fantastic player for the Gamecocks. And it was Clemson's TJ Parker that also got these way too early All-American honors. He had 11 sacks last year, so a very productive dude. But again, if R. Mason Thomas is able to go and have a big season for the Sooners, then I think he could very much emerge and become one of those guys that gets those All-American selections. Another guy along the defensive line, Jaden Jackson. Pro Football Writers Association of America, ESPN, dubbed him a freshman All-American. So he's already on the radar for a lot of these guys that are going to be voting on these awards. And if he can go and he can reproduce what he did this year and maybe increase his sack total by a couple, get himself to like 4 sacks instead of 2, I think he could very well be an All-American consideration next year because he's already on everybody's radar. And you kind of have to be on people's radar a lot of times to emerge as somebody that gets that kind of recognition. And so, yeah, I'm not going to sleep on Jaden Jackson. You know my affinity for Jaden Jackson. You know how I feel about the player. If you've been listening to Locked On Sooners for some time, this is the dude that I think is transforming Oklahoma's defense because of his quickness, his strength, his ability to take on blockers, his ability to play with leverage. He's just so, so good. At linebacker, Kip Lewis. I mean, the dude has a nickname for when he returns interceptions for touchdowns, Kip 6. If you're getting monikers like that, people are going to take notice of what you're doing on the football field. And he had big plays in Oklahoma's win over Auburn, Oklahoma's win over Alabama, both interception returns for touchdowns. But the guy, he just flies around the football. He can play in space. He can play in coverage. He can get downhill and help in the run game. I think you're going to see a more productive Kip Lewis this year. I mean, Danny Stutzman was just vacuuming up all of the sacks like Kirby in Super Smash Bros. He was just eating up everybody. I think Kip Lewis is going to benefit from Danny Stutzman's departure, but statistically, he will benefit from Danny Stutzman's departure because somebody's got to tackle those guys that Danny Stutzman's not going to be there to get. And I know the easy answer would have been Kobe McKenzie, but I just don't think he's going to be on enough people's radars as voters to put him in an All-American discussion. I think he could be a great player. I think he could be a big-time performer for the Sooners, but if I'm having to pick a linebacker, it's going to be Kip Lewis because he's had the big plays. And a lot of times it's those big highlight plays that make people take notice of what you're doing on the football field. Lastly, Robert Spears-Jennings. That's my dude, man, out of the Tulsa area. He's a guy that I think has the ability to do everything you want a safety to do on the football field. He can play in coverage. He can blitz off the edge. He can play downhill in the run game. He can play in the box. You can line him up in single high sets, and he's just a dynamic player for you. He hits hard, and he's somebody that can just separate the receiver from the football. And he does a really good job at making sure he's doing it in a way that's legal and not going to get him penalized. So I'm real high on Robert Spears-Jennings going into this year. I thought he was fantastic in 2024, his first full season as a starter. And I think the sky is the limit for him. I think he's got a chance to make a name for himself this next year, even though, ESPN's looking at like guys like Caleb Downs, and Rod Moore of Ohio State and Michigan, and Michael Taffy of Texas. I think Robert Spears-Jennings has a chance to make as much noise as any safety in America. And again, if Oklahoma's offense is better, if Oklahoma can improve their record to say 9 or 10 wins, then a lot of these guys that I'm talking about are going to be on everybody's radar because Oklahoma is going to be in the playoff picture, and people are going to be talking about what Oklahoma's defense is doing, what John Mateer is doing. And so I think these are a group of guys that have a chance to find themselves on some All-American award lists at the end of 2025. Boomer Sooner, Boomer Sooner, Boomer Sooner, Boomer Sooner.